folks, Amy from Colorado Mountain Living. I'm feeling like getting into one of those creative projects just because, you know, that wintry weather is still around and, well, it gets kind of boring in the wintertime. So I'm thinking about going back to an old technique I used to use for making jewelry, and that's casting bronze using a kiln instead of your traditional foundry casting. So I'm going to show you guys these pieces up close here. These are 2 pieces of bronze honeycomb that I produced in a foundry class. So the process of this, of traditional foundry, is where you make a wax sculpture, and I already had wax out of the beeswax, honeycomb, but you make a wax sculpture, then you pour plaster around it, and then you fire that plaster, burn out whatever inside, and then you pour your bronze, your liquefied bronze into that. So that's the traditional way of casting bronze, but I take it down to a micro level using a kiln, and I'll show you how that works. It's still pretty incredible as far as what you can get for pieces. You still get solid bronze as your end product, but it just is a little bit more of a micro level that you can do inside of your home versus something that's really dangerous that has to be performed with a lot of extra safety equipment. So I thought I was going to be making jewelry when I did bronze casting, but these are more like paperweights. They're quite heavy. I would say they're 2, maybe 3 ounces of bronze in each one of these pieces. So what I'm going to be working with today, I still have honeycomb. Sometimes when you're beekeeping, you'll find little pieces of honeycomb with the bees build in funny places that you can scrape off, and they're just really interesting looking, and it would be really fun to make some bronze jewelry out of this. So the main material that I use for this type of bronze casting is metal clay. You can find this in the jewelry world. It's a small niche of people that use metal clays for fabricating jewelry. Basically, it's pulverized, atomized almost, bronze and coppers and silvers, and then they put a binder to mix it with. And once you mix it with water, you kind of have a clay-like material to work with. And then when you fire it in the kiln at a certain temperature for a certain period of time, that clay gets so hot that the molecules fuse to each other, the binder burns away, the water burns away, and you're just left with your solid bronze product. So that's what we're going to use today. I'm using Hadar. Hadar is an artist that developed her own clay mixture. I've had really good success with it. And it's in a powdered form in this little vial. And I'm going to add water, and we're going to make a version of clay thin enough that I can paint over my honeycomb. In the art clay world, it's called slip. And I think probably in the pottery world, it might be called slip. It's basically like a paste. It's a watered down version of your clay. You're making a paste to cover or connect, like sort of glue together other pieces. But I'm just going to be painting my entire honeycomb in like a thin, multiple layers of this metal clay and let it dry before I put it into the kiln. So I've got my honeycomb. The next thing I have to do is mix up my clay. So I use a little container. I've already got some water in it. It's already got some residual clay from before, and I'm going to be adding the powdered clay to this. I think what they mix the powdered clay with is like a methyl cellulose. It's kind of like a gummy material. And I'm just going to start stirring this up. Toothpick works good. I sometimes just use the opposite end of a paintbrush. And I'm going for a thin paste consistency. It'll start to thicken because I think that methyl cellulose thickens it up. I forgot I had this clay. It's been so long since I've done this kind of casting because I found a new way to do honeycombs that are metal, and that's with electroforming. So let me show you a piece that I do using an entirely different process. This is using copper and an electric current, and I get it to plate over the honeycomb after I add a conductive paint to the honeycomb. Once I add the current, it starts to deposit copper to the piece. So then you get a completely encased honeycomb in copper, and you can make it thick enough to make jewelry out of. And if you want to see more about my pieces, I have them for sale on the website, and I'll put a link in there. But this is quite a substantial statement piece of a honeycomb necklace, and this one is $95. But each one comes from a unique piece of honeycomb, and then I'll add embellishments like like a charm to it. The other thing I'm going to do right now while the clay is settling is I'm going to trim some of this honeycomb so it's a little bit cleaner looking. So I'm just going to get away some of the broken pieces. Another thing that you can add at this point are the final, this is a bronze bail. This is what the necklace hangs on. So these are handy to add at this point because it'll fuse into the bronze of the clay during the firing. There's that one. This white one I really wanted to trim more. This one I'm thinking I'm going to make more of a horizontal pendant. So let's check on this clay status. I can feel the heft of it for sure. Definitely more soupy. It can be soupy. It's just going to take, you have to always account for the drying time. So because we're in a dry climate, I actually feel pretty confident these will dry quickly. All right, so the first thing I'd really do is just start painting these little pieces. We're going to be probably doing a few layers. So I paint, let it dry, and then do another layer because you want it to be thick. You want the bronze to fuse, and if you have a really, really thin layer, it might not fuse. So I'm using a little hot air heater, a little embossing. So I'm going to be careful with it. I don't want it to get too hot, but I'm thinking a little bit of heat, a little bit of air is going to help dry these pieces a little bit more quickly. I remember when doing these in North Carolina, it would take sometimes overnight for the clay to really dry out. But here in a dry climate, it won't take that long at all. So the fan's still going in the background, but I'm going to show you what I look for on these pieces as they're drying. So there's still a couple little wet spots, but I'm just looking for any honeycomb that's showing through where I might need to patch up and put a little bit more of this clay. So I'm just kind of going through patching up any weak spots. I'll put this back under the fan, but it's really important, I would say, to get, especially on the top surface, you want all these honeycombs to be really well connected. So sometimes a little bit of a thicker layer can be helpful. Okay, so my pieces are dry. I'm going to show you the next step in getting the pieces ready for the kiln. So you fill in your cup with half full with carbon. This is activated carbon. I think it's like coconut shell activated carbon. It's kind of like a bed for it to lie on. It's going to all heat up. So what we have to do is burn off the clay part and burn out the wax part. So this happens first. There's two steps to this. So we're going to place the pieces on the bed of carbon like this. And so there's space in between them. And it's going to allow them to freely burn off the binder of the clay and burn out the wax. And so that is going to be the first step. Then we let the pieces cool, add more carbon later, and do a second firing, and that's the part that fuses all of this together. And that's the exciting part. So I'm going to do I've got about 1 inch in there. And then, so the first step is to get the kiln going. This goes right in the middle of the kiln. It's sitting on a ceramic shelf right in the middle of the kiln. There's a thermocouple in the back that measures the temperature. It's pretty critical to understand what temperature your kiln is burning at, because that affects the temperature options that you're choosing for your kiln. So right now it's saying it's at 63 degrees. So I'm going to actually put in a little meat thermometer probe here to verify that temperature. And close the door just to kind of see what we're doing, what we're getting. So it's saying 63 degrees and it's saying 73 degrees in the kiln. And I have it on good authority that on the wall, in here, it's actually 71 degrees in the basement. So I'm actually inclined to believe the temperature probe is more accurate than the thermocouple that's in the back. So I'm going to compensate my temperature firings 10 degrees, so 73 degrees. So the kiln can be really tricky, can be really finicky. It's essential to keep really good notes on how things go when you're using it. So I have some old notes that I found from years before. We're talking about 4 or 5 years ago, and I used to use this as my primary method for making bronze honeycombs. And it's a 2-part burnout. The first part has to be open. Your pieces have to be on top of the carbon to burn away the wax and the clay. So that's in there. Now, the language of the kiln is weird, but with some practice you can get used to it. So there's preset programs, and I have one of the programs preset to what I need right here. So hitting start, program 4, it's going to ramp at 1100 degree ramp up to 1100 degrees. The first temperature we're going to hold it at is 1100 degrees plus 10 because we're compensating for the temperature difference by the thermocouple. So starting, we're going to hold that at the 1100 10 degree temperature for 2 hours. I put an extra 10 minutes on there just for good measure, but holding it at that temperature for 2 hours is going to ensure that all that binder is burnt off, all that wax is burnt out, and the only thing that's left is going to be the bronze that needs to be fused together in stage 2. Step, just hit start, and now it's on. Now it's running. The run light is on. You just heard a click. That means that the heat elements have clicked on, and this temperature will start to run up. So it's saying 64 degrees right now. It doesn't take long, trust me. Within a few minutes, it will be in the hundreds. And so basically, we just let it sit. It could take a while for it to ramp up to the 1100 degrees. And it can be a lengthy process, but hopefully if it's done right, then we'll have some really cool results. So it's been about 20 minutes and we're at 500 degrees, and I'm just starting to smell some of the burning. So there you go. You can see it with the light. If it's backlit, you can see it. So it's definitely burning off. So a little bit of ventilation in a fan is a good idea at this point. Okay, it's done. 2 hours and 10 minutes. And now it's time to cool off. So I'm just gonna turn off the kiln. Here's our pieces in there. Very charcoaly looking, don't they? So I let those cool for a good hour, and then I'll do the second fire with more carbon on top, and there'll be another full layer of carbon on top all the way to the top, and then 2 more hours in the kiln at the highest temperature, which is about 1700 degrees. So it'll definitely be toastier. At this point, we're ready to bury up more of this carbon. So I'm just going to fill it to the top. You do go through a lot of carbon doing this technique, but you definitely need a lot to keep it from oxidizing. All right, putting it back in the kiln. Still pretty hot in there. So now we're going to do the second firing. So for the second firing, I'm going to set a different program compared to the first ramping. This one is going to be a full ramp, coming to speed as fast as possible, and then we're going to go all the way up to 1750. That's the temperature at which to fuse the bronze. Almost done, just a few minutes left, but you can definitely see, if I turn the lights off, quite orange. in there. So when this finishes up, I'm just going to let it cool down in the kiln overnight, and then we'll take a look in the morning, see what we've got. Okay, so it's the next morning, everything's cool. This is the most exciting and scariest part of the process because you're going to see how it turned out. And sometimes it doesn't turn out, so you waste all of these hours, pretty much an entire day, and all the work of preparing your piece. So I'm preparing myself right now because I haven't looked yet, but it's not going to be anything impressive when you first open it. It's just going to be a pile of ash, but we're going to dig through it and pull out the pieces and clean them up and see what they look like. Okay, I know there's 2 pieces in here. And I'm seeing the same problem that I had before with the carbon stuck to the pieces. So it's looking to me like they didn't turn out, which is really unfortunate. Pretty much like that. So that feels like kind of a waste. Bummer. Yeah, you can pretty much break them up. They're not hard at all. So it's hard to say what's the cause of the problem. So yeah, pieces didn't turn out. I already broke them up. I'm trying to study them to see like what's wrong. If it was too high of a heat, I could try adjusting the temperature. I haven't been able to really figure out what the problem is lately since I've done this. Could try a slower burnout. So I could try it again on these pieces. But then I'm risking sacrificing these pieces, right? So sometimes your pieces don't turn out, and it's a real bummer, and you waste all that time. So I'm going to give it a try one more time with my other pieces, and I'm going to adjust the temperature of the kiln. I'm thinking the issue is that it's just getting too hot. So I'm going to drop the temperature by 50 degrees, try it again, and see what we get. So back into the kiln. It's hard because there's a lot of variables. So you have to just change like one variable at a time. All right, so the second firing is done, and I let it cool down really gradually. So now I'm going to open it up and cool the rest of the vessel outside the kiln. We'll see. I have no idea if lowering the temperature 40 degrees made any difference, but hoping so. I hope to figure this out. I really want to get back to doing some of these clay bronze castings because you can do some really cool stuff with it. So. All right, so it's cooled down. Here's the moment, and I don't want to be too excited because I feel like I haven't quite figured out what the issue is yet. So I'm going to dig out my pieces here. So what I'm hoping to see are pieces that are metallic. So far so good, not black, and relatively held together. So this one is promising. Let's see what the other one looks like. Still a little bit hot. So they're very light, and that's because I can tell I didn't use a lot of bronze clay. Pretty much don't really look like anything special at this point. They need to be shined up. And they're, like I said, they're lighter than what I would like them to be. But this one in particular held its shape pretty well. And this one, pretty good. It just got a little bit of rough around the edges, but they seem pretty tough. I can't break them apart, so I don't think they're overfired. So the next step is to clean them up over the sink and with a wire bristle brush and see if I can shine them up. Really worth preserving. I'm just using a Dremel to get in there. Wire brush really does the best as far as getting in all those little grooves. The other thing that works really good is a tumbler. So I think you can see that it really brightens up once you scrub it. The bronze really starts to shine. It's golden looking. It's a dark champagne bronze is the name of it. It has a little bit more of a brownish hue to it. It's a perfect casting of the honeycomb that I got from the hive. So really, I think this piece came out great. It's what I was hoping for, and it's a little bit lighter weight than what I was expecting. So it's a nice perfect lightweight charm, or it's a perfect lightweight pendant for a necklace. And so that's what I'm going to make with that. Let's look at the before. It just looks not too exciting, like a black piece of chunky briquette. You know, it doesn't look too great. But like you saw with the other one, it'll clean up quick with a brush. Just using a Dremel with a wire brush attachment. Again, you can see how much it shines up with the wire Dremel. So that really is what's going to bring out the shine. This is the quick way to do it. You could also throw it into a jewelry rock tumbler with some silver, with some steel shot, and that can get into the crevices, into the little honeycombs there. I might just use another tool to get into the holes to kind of get the blackness out of there. But not bad. This is the one I was really hoping to preserve and come out, because this is the queen cup. If anyone knows about beekeeping and honeycombs, they know that the bees start to form a queen cell this way to make these little queen cups, and that's what this is. See the little cup right there? They make these to try to make queen bees, so these are very rare in the beehive to find these and make bronze honeycombs out of them. So far, I'm the only person that I know who's making these. I'm doing it with the bronze casting in the kiln, and I don't know anybody else that's doing it that way. Everybody else is electroforming, and I'll show you the difference next. All right, so I wanted to do a little bit of a compare and a contrast. So this is bronze casted honeycomb using foundry method. This is I took a 2 to 3 inch piece of honeycomb. I added some wax spruce to it. I poured plaster around it, and then poured liquid bronze out of the foundry into it. And then as it cooled, I had to saw off all these major pieces. I didn't even make it all the way through. It was such a tedious job. I mean, that's just solid bronze. Trying to remove the wax sprue, I just couldn't do it. So you get sort of like an artistic feel of a honeycomb. You kind of get there's a little bit more pattern on the back of this one, but we're talking, 2 ounces, 3 ounces a piece. Not suitable for jewelry, maybe a paperweight, something artistic, but not what I was going for. But you can definitely cast bronze using the traditional method of foundry. So my next step was doing what I demonstrated in this video was bronze casting using metal clay in a kiln. Now what you get is, first of all, you get shrinkage, and you also get a lighter weight, almost a hollow effect, because you're coating the beeswax with the clay, and then you fire it out. So you have a skeleton of the clay, and then it fuses together at high temperatures to make these bronze. So they're not going to clink, they just kind of clink. They just kind of tap. Very light, but solid. I mean, I can't bend it. It's bronze, very hard material. So you get a great specimen, and you also get finer detail because of the shrinkage. You kind of get a finer detail from that. It's not as blurry as the casting of the foundry. Now here's another example of a necklace I've made 5 years ago. Same idea, bronze casting. I used a different kind of bronze clay. This was a golden bronze clay, so you can see the color difference. The champagne is more of like a tannish almost color, and brownish, and this one's got definitely the yellow tones. And I saved this one. This was one of my favorite pieces I ever made, so it's a personal piece in my collection. The backside has less detail, but it's a heavier piece. It's got a lot more bronze on it then it's probably 3 times the weight of this piece. So there's a lot you can do with it. I think I might get back into this. It's a lot more fun. Let me compare that to electroforming. Electroforming you can only do with copper, and you get copper plating on top of the honeycomb. So the specimen that you pick ends up getting bigger because you're laying down copper on top of it. You don't get any shrinkage from your specimen, and you just get, I mean, this was a really large piece anyway, had a lot of depth to it. You know, it's almost a 3/4 of an inch thick right here on the thick part. So you get a really neat product, but you don't quite get that sculptural look, the softening that you do when you get it in a casted form. Some of the edges become, what you do get is a little bit of extra copper growth on the edges because the copper wants to keep continuing to grow in the solution that it's in. So all these are really neat. You can get, you can do copper clay in the kiln as well as bronze clay. You can do silver clay. There's a lot of varieties. The clay is a lot more expensive of a material. When you do copper electroforming, you're using copper pipes, sheet copper. It's pennies per square inch or square foot. So your costs are lower. And this is definitely a lightweight. This again is kind of like a hollow form itself. It's copper over the honeycomb. So it's like a coating, a thick coating, but it kind of limits you to copper unless you want to send it off to another place that specializes in plating. So you can get plating over it. You can get silver plating, but not everybody wants their stuff plated because that tends to wear off. So anyhow, I did electroforming for the last 3 years exclusively, but I think I'm going to get back into the casting now that I've sort of did some troubleshooting on my kiln, because I do like these smaller pieces, and I think that they're appealing to people that want something a little bit smaller. So pretty cool, guys. I am glad I was able to figure that out. I was really disappointed yesterday when the first batch didn't work because those were really good pieces. I was looking forward to seeing those as necklaces, and now I'm really just bummed that I basically ruined 2 good pieces. If you're interested in the necklaces I'm going to make with the bronze castings, I'll be listing them in the shop, so look for those links in the video description if you want to purchase these. They are for sale. But I think I'm going to get back into this style. I love the bronze, and not many people doing the bronze casting. So I think I'm going to get back into this to stay on the cutting edge of being original, and we'll see what I can do with more honeycombs. So thanks guys for tuning in, and let me know what you think about casting with bronze using a kiln. It's definitely useful, this little kiln right here. I think I could be doing a lot more projects with it, so we'll see what I come up with.